Hey, what's up YouTube? Skybadger here, and I'm back in the first part of a series based on naval tactics and how to effectively use a navy in Call of War 1942. So this first video here, I'm going to base on explaining the naval units and hopefully an unbiased way. Now, my way of using and producing naval units goes often against what more experienced players will tell you to, and through this series I'm going to convince you that my way is the best way, hopefully anyway. I mean, it'll kind of be a waste of time if I do this and people still use sub spam, but anyway, we're going to start by explaining all of the naval units and what they're good for. So first thing first is the destroyer. Now the destroyer is a very fast, well, it is the fastest of the naval units, I believe. If we have a look at its speed at the top, 68 kilometers per hour. I'd also like to state before we go any further, I am not going to be discussing the nuclear variants, as very, very rarely do these ever get put into use in the game. So destroyers are very important to anyone in the game, especially if you are coming under pressure from submarines. Destroyers are the best way to deal with submarines, and that's about all they're good for. They are good, they have a fair bit of speed, so you can use them for scouting on coastlines, but they cannot damage enemy troops on land. Their main use is for destroying subs and escorting other ships. Then we have the cruiser. The cruiser is, as many experienced players will tell you, useless. They are a slight mix of destroyer and battleship. As you can see, they are very good, well, not very good, they are average against ships, attacking with 13 damage, and against subs, attacking and defending with roughly 2 damage. Now, they do have some good range on them, so if you use them wisely, this range can make up for what they lack in their ability to attack. Now, they are good against air, and this is why I like to use them. Due to the ability to destroy air targets, they are great for defending convoys. Convoys will often get bombed the hell out of, but if you pair them up with cruisers, they'll be just fine. They also do some damage against ground units, and this can make a difference in certain scenarios. In certain scenarios, I've been able to make the most of this and use cruisers very effectively. So next we have the battleship. The battleship is kind of, well, many players will once again tell you useless, but I believe otherwise. Being one of the slowest ships at 36 kilometers per hour, well, I don't know why I'm saying that speed because it changes as it levels up. It has a very high level of hit points at 75. Against ships, it is very effective. At the top level, it can do just over 30 damage, I'm pretty sure from what I remember. Yeah, 32 damage. It can defend itself against subs to an extent. It's not at all recommended you use it against subs, but it does have that 1 point of defense value, so it can do some damage. You'll also notice that its attack values against land units is the highest of all the ships, at 4.2 and 3.5. And actually, if you have a look at artillery in the game, even at its highest level, it is still slightly less than what ships can do. So battleships are actually a very effective but a very expensive form of artillery. And this is something that many players overlook, is that although battleships aren't that effective overall, they can be used incredibly effectively if you know how. But we'll get to that in a later video. So next, I'm going to talk about the submarine. Now, the submarine is debatably, and many players will tell you, the most useful unit in the Naval Research tab. And this is purely because it is cheap and quick to produce. If we have a look at the costs here, it is easy to produce, doesn't have much upkeep, and this is where sub-spam comes from. Because this unit can be produced quickly and relatively effectively, it is overproduced by many people. And you'll often come into a game, and if it is a game of naval powers, there will be hundreds of subs in the sea. And while this is an effective strategy, if you know how to defeat it, how to play around it, it can turn to, well, I'm not going to say that. It can be relatively ineffective if you know how to defeat it. So that's what I think about the subs. They can't hit any troops on land, obviously. They can do some damage to air, but their main point is to attack ships that are kind of out in the open, unescorted, and if you stack them up in groups high enough, to attack larger groups. So the last ship I haven't discussed yet is the carrier. Now, to me, the carrier is an amazing vessel with heaps of potential in the game that people just aren't seeing. The carrier has some defense against air. It's very good if you manage to get it into the right position at defending against ships and submarines. So it can defend itself, but that's not its point. The carrier's sole use is to carry airplanes, kind of as the name suggests. So that takes us on to the next unit that I'm going to talk about. And although it's not necessarily a naval unit, I'm going to talk about the Naval Bomber. Now, the Naval Bomber, in my eyes, is an amazing unit. People underestimate it. It has so much potential. And this is why people fall victim to sub-spam so often. Because often when you're going up against sub-spam, you are fighting dark. And this is how I overcome it. In this fleet here, for example, I am lacking subs, which is something I do normally have with a fleet of the ships. Naval Bombers can guide the way. With Naval Bombers, I can reveal subs in the area and I can hunt them down. And this makes it incredibly easier to stop and slow down someone's ability to sub-spam if you know where they are. It makes it easier to evade them, get around them, and just, makes naval combat a lot easier. Another good thing about having these sort of convoys on board, these naval bombers, is if there are enemy ships in the area that you can't get to, convoys that are about to disembark, the aircraft can get to them way faster than your ships can. So instead of having to split up ships to attack multiple targets, you can get info and then potentially attack these targets way quicker and easier, and not having to split up your ships and make them weaker. So that is a brief description of the naval units. I'm not going to talk about interceptors or tactical bombers, even though I do employ them in my naval forces, but they are more for, like, tactical bombers I use for their range. They can scout at a long distance. Interceptors can be used to shoot down enemy aircraft that may be harassing my naval bombers. So that is personally my explanation of all the naval units briefly and quickly. Next, I want to talk to you about kind of combinations of units. So I want to discuss more in depth sub-spam, destroyer spam, and why it's good to have a mix of units. I'm going to try to convince you that a mix of units is better, but I'm also going to discuss the positives and negatives of sub-spam and destroyer spam. Thank you for watching, like, comment, and subscribe.